There are countless tales about hacked Pokémon games floating around the internet. Some are intriguingly crafted, like the one where your starter is a ghost Pokémon. Others, they dive into absurd territory stories of people meeting untimely deaths after playing, or the game whispering ominous messages to them. Don't these writers know the golden rule of horror? Less is more. But I digress. The more I heard about these hacked games, the more curious I became. Supposedly, they're everywhere: thrift stores, eBay listings, handed out by shadowy figures in alleys. My experience wasn't quite so dramatic. I stumbled upon my cursed find in a trash bin. It was during garbage day, the truck backing into my neighbor's dumpster, when I caught a glimpse of the cartridge peeking out. I waved down the trashman and asked if I could grab it. He shrugged. Trash was trash after all. Of course, I checked with my neighbor. It wasn't theirs. They seemed baffled, as if the cartridge had materialized out of thin air. Their young son, however, spotted it and lunged forward, eyes wide with excitement as he yelled, "Pokémon! I want it, Mommy," but his mother declined. She reminded him he didn't even own a Game Boy. He pouted, and I left with my mysterious find. The sticker on the cartridge was worn, a plain old Pokémon Red version with a small tear across Charizard's neck. Nostalgia tingled in the back of my mind. I had blue version as a kid, but I'd always wanted to try red. As I walked home, I turned the cartridge over in my hands, smiling faintly at the thought of playing an old classic. But when I fired it up, disappointment set in. The title screen didn't read Pokémon Red version. Instead, in jagged crimson letters, it read Pokémon Strangled Red. My stomach churned slightly. A hack. Hacks were intriguing, but worthless. Still, it was free. Curiosity nudged me forward. The title struck me as odd. Strangled Red? That didn't make any sense. When people are strangled, they turn blue, not red. I briefly wondered if there was a paired blue hack floating around somewhere. The more I stared at the title, the more uneasy I felt, but curiosity gnawed at me. I decided to see what this Strangled Red was all about. The first thing I noticed was the title screen. A Charizard stood next to the trainer sprite, a significant change from the original game's rotating Pokémon. No cycling sprites here. It just lingered on Charizard, motionless, staring. Even after 5 minutes of waiting, nothing changed. Reluctantly, I pressed start, but something felt off. There was no Charizard cry, just silence. Then I saw it. A continue option. My heart skipped a beat. Used games often had save files. I could peek into the previous player's adventure. But when I tried to load it, the game simply said, "No." I blinked in confusion. What did it mean? No? I tried again. No. Frustration bubbled as I tried a third and fourth time. Still nothing. But on that fourth attempt, I heard it, a faint, distorted cry from Charizard. So quiet, I almost thought I imagined it. Uneasy now, I selected New Game instead. The screen went black. There was no Professor Oak, no cheery opening theme. Just emptiness. For what felt like minutes, I stared at the void. Finally, the screen faded in, revealing a small bedroom. 2 beds, 2 TVs, a computer in the corner. The trainer sprite was familiar, identical to the original Red version. Yet something was wrong. The game hadn't asked for my name. When I opened the pause menu, I found my trainer already had one, Steven. No, that's not my real name. And no, this wasn't some elaborate trick meant to unnerve me. It wasn't a coincidence. Something wasn't right. And that was only the beginning. This game isn't self-aware or haunted, at least, not that I know of. It just already had a name chosen for me. Intrigued, I dove into the file. The trainer had the starter amount of money, no badges, and a single Pokémon. But something was off. The sprite wasn't red. This trainer's hair was longer, almost cascading down his back. Red's cheerful grin was replaced by a smirk, a sly, knowing expression that sent a small shiver down my spine. Strangely enough, I found myself liking it. This sprite had personality, a flair that Red's blank stare never captured. Curiosity driving me, I checked his Pokémon. A lone Charmander, level 5, named Miki. Nothing odd at first glance, her stats were typical for a starter, and she only knew Scratch and Tail Whip, basic stuff. But something about the name Miki stuck with me, though I couldn't place why. Brushing it off, I continued exploring the game. When I moved Steven, as the trainer was called around, I noticed his long hair showed up on the back of the sprite when he faced away from the camera. That attention to detail struck me as impressive for a hack. I wandered the room, but it wasn't one I recognized. It wasn't the protagonist's typical house. When I descended the stairs, the atmosphere changed. A second trainer was waiting. The moment I entered the room, he turned to face me. "Ready yet?" he asked, no introduction needed. "Yeah," Steven replied immediately, as though he'd been expecting this. The dialogue wasn't like the usual Pokémon banter. It had weight, like there was history between them. I realized this was Mike, my rival. But as I thought back to the 2 beds in the room upstairs, something clicked. Mike wasn't just my rival. He was my brother. They bickered like siblings, arguing over trivial things like whether Charmander or Squirtle was better. The tension mounted until it inevitably escalated into a battle. The introduction fight felt familiar, almost comforting. Scratch, tackle, scratch, tackle. I only won because Steven had the first move. But it wasn't the battle itself that stood out, it was Steven's sprite during combat. Unlike Red's stiff stance, Steven's pose was dynamic, his hair seemingly caught in an invisible breeze. It was a subtle change, but it made him feel alive. After the battle, I stepped outside, greeted by a version of the Pallet Town theme that felt off, slower, slightly distorted, yet still recognizable. I explored the surroundings and discovered this was in fact Pallet Town, just different. Steven's house was tucked away to the west, outside the usual map boundaries. There was no grassy patch to the north, no strange NPCs. It was eerily isolated. I wandered over to Red's house. His mother was inside, and when I spoke to her, she smiled and commented, "Steven, you're such a handsome young man. I hope my son grows up to be like you someday." It hit me then, this game took place a year before the events of the original Pokémon Red. Red was upstairs, a child playing on his NAs. When I talked to him, he said, "I'm going to be the best too. Just wait until it's my turn." The game was beginning to grow on me. This wasn't just a cheap hack, it felt like a window into another story. Steven wasn't some silent blank slate. He had a history here, a reputation. People in town recognized him, spoke to him like he mattered. Even Blue's sister had new dialogue. Their conversation hinted at a budding romance, ending with a kiss and a floating heart above her head. When I reached Professor Oak's lab, I expected the usual tutorial spiel. Instead, Oak simply handed me a Pokédex with a kind smile. "Here, Steven, you've got a good head on your shoulders. This might help you on your journey. No grand speeches about catching them all. No demands to document every Pokémon. It was a gift, given out of trust and goodwill." I was starting to really like this game. It wasn't just another generic Pokémon hack, it was something else entirely. Steven wasn't a stand-in for the player. He was someone, a character with his own role to play. And as I explored, the feeling only grew stronger. But even as I admired the attention to detail and the thoughtful story, a faint unease gnawed at me. Something about this world, this Steven, felt too real, too personal. And I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't the one controlling him. I followed the path, just like any typical trainer would. North, through towns, collecting badges, gaining praise from new gym leaders. Steven's reputation grew too. NPCs talked about him like they knew him, like he was more than just some random kid from Pallet Town. I used Miki for every battle, and she was growing at an alarming rate. She tore through Brock without breaking a sweat, steamrolled Misty without any trouble at all. It was like nothing could stop her. Even super effective attacks barely fazed her. She was a powerhouse, plain and simple. By level 25, she evolved into Charizard faster than any Charmander I'd ever raised. But something changed when I reached Lavender Town. Sure, Lavender Town is the setting for every creepy Pokémon story, but this was different. There was no Team Rocket invasion, no sense of impending doom. Of course, I remembered that this was a year before Red's time, so it made sense that the invasion hadn't happened yet. Still, it felt wrong. I tried to enter Pokémon Tower, hoping to catch a Ghastly, but that's when things truly started to get strange. "I have no reason to be here," Steven said. He wouldn't go inside. No matter what I did, no matter how I tried to coax him, Steven refused to step into the tower. It didn't make sense. I mean, there were plenty of places in Kanto that didn't really serve a purpose. Random houses, little NPC children milling about, nothing of importance. But this place of all places Steven wouldn't enter? I shrugged it off. If he wasn't going in, neither would I. Besides, Mickey could handle anything that came my way. I didn't need a Ghastly. I moved on. Lavender Town, now nothing more than a strange detour, just a passing through point. The game carried on as usual. I defeated the remaining gyms, one after the other, until I finally arrived at the Elite Four. There, I was met with Mike, my brother, who was already standing before me, ready for the championship battle. Miki made quick work of him, as expected. But the aftermath wasn't like any other battle. There was no tension between us, no rivalry. It felt almost too pleasant. The brothers congratulated each other, shook hands, and the screen went white. No Hall of Fame, no credits, just a blank staring screen. Then it came back. I was back at the house. The two brothers were sitting at a computer, talking to each other. "I don't want to," Steven said quietly. "Come on, just let me borrow her for a second. I need to finish the Pokédex. The entry won't register unless she sees me as her master, just for a second. Please," Mike begged. Steven remained silent. "She's my Miki," Steven replied, his voice cold. "I promise I'll give her back. Come on, just let me borrow her for a second." I was confused. What was going on? Without thinking, I selected no. But Mike kept pleading, "Please." The conversation looped endlessly. No matter how many times I said no, it didn't stop. It was as if the game was forcing me to agree. Curiosity overwhelmed me, so I hit yes. "All right, this will only take a second," Steven said. "Then we'll both be Pokémon Masters." The screen flickered and the animation for trading Pokémon appeared. Odd, I thought. Trading animations weren't meant to appear in a solo game, were they? But whatever, it was happening. First, Miki traveled down the trading tube, then dash snap ... The sound of it startled me. I jumped, the noise so sharp, so sudden, it reverberated through the silent room. The volume was up too loud, echoing the sound as it filled the air. I stared at the screen. Something was wrong. The game was still running, but Miki was no longer there. She was gone. I waited, but nothing happened. The room felt colder. The silence stretched longer than it should have. And then, I could have sworn I heard Miki's cry, faint, distant. It wasn't the usual Charizard cry, it was distorted, twisted. It was as if Miki wasn't my Charizard anymore. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking as the game froze. Miki was still suspended in mid-trade, but nothing was happening. The game was stuck silent and lifeless. With a heavy sigh, I turned it off, wondering when my last save had been. When I turned the game back on, I stared at the start screen for a long moment. Something was wrong. There was no Charizard next to the trainer, and when I pressed start, I noticed something even stranger. The new game option was missing. Only continue remained. I selected it, unsure of what to expect, but what greeted me made my breath catch in my throat. 1 year later, the Lavender Town theme began to play, distorted and distant, almost as if it didn't belong. The screen faded in from blackness to reveal Steven in Pokémon Tower. The music felt wrong, alien. It wasn't the haunting, familiar melody of the tower. It was the Lavender Town theme, warped and unnerving. Steven was standing in front of a tombstone. He wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything at all. Confused, I pressed the ... prompt, trying to make sense of it. I tried walking, and to my shock, I had control. I brought up the menu to check my party, but there was nothing. No Pokémon, no Mickey, no items. The Pokédex was gone. His bag was empty. Panic crept into my chest. I checked his trainer card. There was no money, no badges. But what sent a chill down my spine was his playtime. 8,795 hours. That didn't make sense. I'd only logged about 30 before. But that wasn't the worst part. His picture, the confident, handsome trainer I'd come to know, was different. His eyes were hollow, blank. His once proud smirk was gone, replaced with a void. His hair, once meticulously styled, was now a tangled mess. I couldn't look at him anymore. I closed the menu, desperate to leave the tower. But with every step I took away from the tombstone, the screen flickered, like it does when a Pokémon is poisoned. My throat tightened. I brought up his trainer card again. His picture was worse. With every step, his posture slouched. His head drooped lower, his shoulders hunched. By the time I reached the exit of the tower, Steven was on his knees, his hands pressed to his face, his head hanging limply. I knew what was happening, but seeing it like this, it was too much. I began to piece things together in my mind. I'd always wondered why there was no champion in the original games. Why did I, the protagonist, have to face my rival when there had never been a previous champion to challenge? The answer hit me like a cold slap. The previous champion had given up. Miki was dead. And with her, something in Steven died too. His Pokédex, his Pokémon, his badges, his fame, all of it was gone. He had thrown it all away. The year I had missed, the year that didn't exist for me, had taken everything from him. I did the math. There were exactly 8,765 hours in a year. Add that to the 30 hours I had logged before, and it matched up perfectly. Even then the game kept going, but I had nothing left to do. No Pokédex, no Pokémon, no direction. What was I supposed to do now? I wandered through the town, talking to every NPC. They all said the same thing. Are you okay? I wasn't sure anymore. What had happened? What was happening to me? Still mourning, I see. Everything will be all right. Please, is there anything we can do? The words echoed through the game, over and over, but Steven never responded. The townspeople, those hollow, lifeless NPCs, kept repeating the same line, the same empty sympathy, like a broken record. I couldn't pull myself away. Something in me felt compelled to stay. Something was wrong. Curious, I ventured into the tall grass, hoping for something, anything to break the eerie monotony. A battle triggered. But instead of a Pokémon, only Steven's sprite appeared, standing motionless in the tall grass. Confused, I waited for the battle to start, but it never did. The wild Rattata simply vanished. The screen went back to normal. The same thing happened with every encounter. Wild Pidgey ignored me. Wild Pidgey wandering off. The battle music never changed, either just the constant, haunting Lavender Town theme. It followed me everywhere, sometimes slowing down, sometimes not. It was always there. Frustration began to gnaw at me. I had talked to everyone. I'd visited every town. No one was telling me anything, just offering their hollow condolences, shoving items like lemonade or coffee at me, ... I slapped myself, realizing the truth too late. The answer was right there. I had to go back to Pallet Town. The journey there took what felt like forever. No Pokémon to fly, no bicycle to speed me up. Steven moved at half the usual pace. It was agonizingly slow. I barely had the energy to keep going. When I finally arrived, nothing had changed. The same dreary atmosphere filled the air. First, I tried talking to Professor Oak. He just shrugged, muttering, "These things happen. You were just unlucky." I tried Blue's sister. "Please don't leave home again," she begged. Red's mom wouldn't even look at me, her eyes averted as if I were a ghost. With nowhere else to turn, I wandered west. I found the house from the beginning, the house I had never entered since leaving Pallet Town. Inside, Mike was there, but talking to him was useless. "I'm so sorry," Mike said, his voice flat and drained. I pondered the idea, my thoughts turning darker. Was this it? Was Steven doomed to walk the earth in silence? Forced to relive his misery over and over, haunted by the ghost of Miki, hearing nothing but endless pity and concern from the people around him. In a last-ditch attempt, I went to the bedroom, the one I hadn't thought of in what felt like forever. I walked over to the bed. "I'm going to bed," Steven muttered, the words chillingly lifeless. The screen faded to black. When it returned, everything had a black tint to it, a sickly, unnatural hue. Mike's sprite was lying in the other bed, just as motionless, just as empty. I had no idea what was happening now. "I'm going to do it." Do what? I had no idea. I tried inspecting everything in the room, but nothing happened. The silence was unbearable. When I left the house, the dialogue came again. "It can bring her back. It can do anything." I froze, confused, and tried to make sense of what that meant. What could do anything? I wandered aimlessly, the confusion deepening. I tried to leave Pallet Town, but Steven wouldn't go any further. Every route was blocked, every path refused. Then suddenly, I saw it. The ocean. I stepped toward it, almost on instinct, and then without warning, Steven walked right into it. Only the upper half of his sprite was visible, like the swimmers you'd encounter near Cerulean City's gym. I didn't know he could swim. And then I saw it. The missing one. I froze. That couldn't possibly mean what I thought it meant. I hadn't tried the missing no trick on this hack yet, but it felt too perfect. It was like the game was practically begging for it. It had to be what he meant. I surfed all the way toward Cinnabar, the water stretching endlessly before me, a strange stillness settling in. The usual hum of the game felt off, like it was holding its breath. The Lavender Town theme? Gone. There was nothing but dead silence. No Pokémon, no sound. Just the endless, empty ocean. I kept moving, my fingers trembling as I surfed up and down the east coast. And then, it happened. A wild Nacino appeared. It was grotesque. A mess of corrupted data, flickering in and out of existence, like some twisted glitch brought to life. And Steven? He didn't flinch, he didn't react, he just commanded that abomination to join him. No, not join him. It was worse than that. Possess him. And it did. The unholy creature slithered into his grasp. I felt my stomach twist. What had I just witnessed? I checked the start menu in a daze. Missing No wasn't in my party. It wasn't even a Pokémon anymore. It was an item. Just an item. Things kept getting stranger. I checked Steven's trainer card. His picture was different now. His back was to me, his long, messy hair hanging limply behind him. His eyes no longer bright with that cocky grin. His posture was wrong. He looked like he had been drained. The game felt wrong, like it had shifted, like it had taken on a life of its own. Something dark, something alive in the code. I remembered what he'd said at the start of the night. And it clicked. I had to do it. I had to follow through. I forced myself to surf again, this time toward Lavender Town. I noticed something unsettling. Every trainer I passed was still awake, still out at this hour. But none of them would look at Steven. No matter how hard I tried, when I walked by, They all turned their heads away, even the ones who were supposed to be static. I spoke to one of the officers in a guardhouse. They all said the same thing, but one officer's words made my blood run cold. Sometimes dead is best. Sweat beaded on my hands. The game was pulling me deeper into its twisted nightmare, and I couldn't escape. I had to complete it, even if it felt wrong. It took forever to reach the Pokémon Tower. The silence was suffocating. By the time I stepped inside, I could barely breathe. I approached the tombstone, the one Steven had stood in front of. I could still see his face, his vacant eyes locked onto it. I tried inspecting it, hoping for anything. But nothing happened. With a shaking breath, I opened the menu and selected Messino from the bag. "Steven, don't do it." Professor Oak's warning echoed in my mind. It was familiar, but wrong, like a corrupted echo of the usual dialogue. The warning came, but it was different this time, distorted. And Steven, in a world that cheated me, why should I play fair? He used it. He obtained something I couldn't even describe. A mishmash of random characters, glitches, and static. What had I just unleashed? I had no control anymore. The game had taken it from me. Steven moved on his own now, walking toward the exit of the tower. Each step was agonizingly slow. The Lavender Town theme started again, but it was different. It was warped. As Steven crossed each border, every line that should have triggered a change in the music, it slowed. The melody distorted, deeper, darker. By the time he reached Cerulean City, the sound had become a demonic rumble, like something was crawling beneath the earth, following him. And I realized this was no longer a game. This was something else, something watching, something that knew I was still here, trapped in its grasp. I just stared at the screen, watching him move, trying to predict where he was going. But it was becoming painfully clear he was heading to Pallet Town. The music had nearly vanished, reduced to nothing more than a single haunting note that echoed in the silence. He went exactly where I'd feared, right to his home. Inside, up the stairs. By this point, there was no music, no sound. Steven moved, one agonizing step at a time. He stopped in front of his brother's bed and turned to face him. At first, I thought the game had frozen. He stood there, unmoving. I couldn't make him move. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop myself from opening the pause menu. I was terrified to look, but I had to. I selected his trainer card. A low, grinding sound filled the room. It was distorted like a Pokémon cry twisted beyond recognition. There he was, Steven, but not Steven anymore. He was hunched over, his hair wild and unkempt. His bangs fell over his face, but even through them, I could see there was nothing there. No face, just darkness. Two bright red eyes pierced through the void, unblinking. A grin, a stark white grin that didn't belong. And then I saw it, his name. It was a jumbled mess of characters. It still read Steven, but it was broken. I couldn't look away. I was paralyzed, my gaze locked onto his for what felt like hours, until my vision started to blur. Tears streamed down my face. I built him, I raised him, I turned him into something great. And now he was this thing, this abomination. I watched him descend into madness, each step pulling him deeper into something I couldn't understand. My tears couldn't stop. They flooded my face wet and hot. I had to do something. I wiped my eyes trying to focus. I opened the menu, desperate to save, desperate to end it. But the game told me no. I couldn't save. I couldn't escape. The pause menu wouldn't close. Nothing worked. In a panic, I opened the bag, hoping for a way out. But nothing happened. I opened the Pokémon menu, and there it was. One Pokémon. A single sprite stared back at me. Its health, 0. Its status, dead. And its name, the same jumbled mess of characters. I hesitated. My fingers trembled. I selected it. The options appeared, eerie and final. Status: it's her. Switch: never. And then, the final option: strangle. My heart hammered in my chest as I selected it. The menu closed. I was back in the room. Stephen was still there. Goodbye, snap. The screen went black and the game shut itself off. I sat there stunned, numb, more confused than frightened. I didn't know what I had just done, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned the game back on, hands trembling. The title screen was different now. Stephen's manic face twisted into a grimace, his Charizard horribly glitched by his side. I pressed start, then continue. What I saw made my stomach drop. A zoomed-out view of Pallet Town, Stephen's home in the distance, tall grass surrounding it, unmovable stones blocking the rest of the town. The image was static, no music, no movement. It stayed like that. And then, white. The screen faded to white. When it returned, it was as if nothing had changed. The title screen. A trainer, a Charizard. I tried to continue, but nothing happened. No, it wasn't over. It would never be over.